January 22nd, 1879, noon. You're a British soldier with the 24th Regiment of Foot, standing in an extended firing line 600 meters from your camp at Isandlwana. You've been shooting at Zulu warriors for over an hour, and your Martini Henry rifle is so hot you can barely touch the barrel. Your shoulder aches from the recoil. You've fired maybe 40 rounds. The Zulus keep coming, but they're pinned down by your volleys, taking cover behind the hills. You're winning. You know you're winning because you've been trained to win, because the British Empire doesn't lose to spear-wielding warriors, because your rifle can kill a man at 400 yards and theirs can't. And then you notice something wrong. The warriors you've been shooting at, the ones directly in front of you, they've stopped advancing. They're just sitting there, taking your fire, dying by the dozens. But on your right flank, there's movement. Thousands of Zulus you didn't see before, running in perfect formation, not toward you but around you. And on your left, the same thing. They're not attacking, they're encircling. This isn't a scene from a disaster movie. This was the reality of January 22nd, 1879, when 20,000 Zulu warriors taught the British Empire the most expensive lesson in military history. By 3:30 p.m., over 1,300 British and colonial troops would be dead. Out of 1,837 men in the camp, only 55 Europeans would escape. The British Army would suffer its worst defeat against an indigenous force in its entire history. And it would happen not because the Zulus had better weapons, but because they had better tactics, better intelligence, and a commander who understood something the British didn't. Firepower means nothing if you can't use it. Before diving into one of the most shocking military reversals in colonial history, if you enjoy learning about battles where arrogance met reality and empires discovered their limits, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. What you're about to hear isn't the sanitized version you learned in school. This is what actually happened when 2,000 soldiers with the most advanced rifles in the world faced warriors who'd been studying their tactics for months, and those warriors had a plan. To understand how this catastrophe happened, you need to understand what the British Empire was in 1879, the largest empire in human history, a quarter of the world's landmass painted red on maps, an industrial superpower with steamships, telegraphs, railways, and rifles that could fire 20 rounds per minute. They deconquered India with a few thousand soldiers. They'd humiliated China in the Opium Wars. They'd crushed rebellions from Ireland to Jamaica to New Zealand. And they genuinely believed they had a divine mission to civilize the world. In southern Africa, that mission had a name: Confederation. Sir Henry Bartle Frere, the British High Commissioner, wanted to unite all of southern Africa under British rule. There were obstacles: the Boer republics, the independent African kingdoms, and the most powerful obstacle of all, the Zulu kingdom under King Cetshwayo. The Zulu military system, the impi, was arguably the most sophisticated indigenous military force in Africa. Created by King Shaka in the early 1800s, it was based on age regiments called amabutho. Every Zulu male belonged to a regiment from adolescence. They trained together, fought together, lived in military barracks near the royal capital at Ulundi. They drilled constantly in formation fighting, in the use of the Iklwa short stabbing spear and the cowhide shield. They could march 50 miles in a day. They could execute complex tactical maneuvers without written orders, and they had a standard battle formation that had won them an empire: the buffalo horns, the impondo zenkomo, the horns of the buffalo. The formation had 4 elements. The chest, the main body, would pin the enemy in place with frontal assault. The 2 horns, fast-moving younger warriors, would sprint around the enemy flanks and encircle them. And the loins, the reserve, would sit with their backs to the battle until called upon. It required incredible discipline, perfect timing, and warriors who understood their role without needing constant orders. The Zulus had been using variations of this formation for 50 years. It had never failed. King Cetshwayo knew the British were coming. He'd been receiving ultimatums since December 1878, demands that he couldn't possibly meet: disband the impi system, accept British residents, pay enormous fines for border incidents. The demands were designed to be refused. Bartle Frere wanted war. On January 11, 1879, he got it. 3 British columns invaded Zululand simultaneously. The main force, the center column under Lord Chelmsford, consisted of about 4,700 men initially. including 1,600 British regulars from the 24th Regiment of Foot. These weren't inexperienced troops. They were professional soldiers who'd served in colonial wars. They had Martini Henry breech-loading rifles, which could fire 12 accurate rounds per minute in the hands of a trained soldier. Each cartridge held a .45 caliber bullet with enough stopping power to kill a man at 600 yards. They had 2 7-pounder artillery pieces. They had rockets. They had overwhelming technological superiority. Lord Chelmsford was confident to the point of arrogance. He divided his force multiple times, sending out reconnaissance parties, splitting columns, scattering his troops across miles of Zulu territory. On January 20th, he established a camp at the base of a distinctive mountain called Isandlwana, shaped like a sphinx, and he made a series of decisions that would define his legacy as one of the worst commanders in British military history. He didn't fortify the camp. British standing orders called for lagering the wagons, creating a defensive perimeter and trenching. Chelmsford refused. He said it would take too long. The real reason, he didn't think it was necessary. His officers suggested defensive positions. He dismissed them. His scouts reported large Zulu movements. He assumed they were cattle raids or diversions. He was so confident that on the morning of January 22nd, he took 2,800 men, more than half his force, and marched away from the camp to chase what he thought was the main Zulu army. He left 1,837 men behind, under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Henry Pulling, a staff officer with no combat command experience. Pulling's orders were simple: defend the camp, wait for further instructions. What Chelmsford didn't know, what his scouts hadn't discovered, was that the main Zulu army, 20,000 warriors commanded by Chiefs Ntishingwio Ka Mahol and Mavumingwana Ka Ndilela, was sitting in a valley 7 miles from his camp, waiting for the right moment to attack. I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient stories together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about the past. Please comment below to let me know where you're listening from, and if you're enjoying this deep dive into the day the British Empire learned it wasn't invincible. The Zulu army had been marching for 5 days. They'd covered 80 kilometers in that time, moving in 2 parallel columns with scouts screening their advance. Their orders from King Sechwio were specific: march slowly, attack at dawn, and eat up the red soldiers. They'd planned to attack on January 23rd, after conducting rituals and ensuring the omens were favorable. They were camped in a valley called Engwebeni, hidden from British scouts, resting before the assault. At 11:00 a.m. on January 22nd, a British scouting party under Lieutenant Charles Raw chased some Zulu cattle raiders over a ridge and stumbled directly into the hidden impi, 20,000 warriors sitting in perfect silence. The moment the British scouts appeared, the Zulus knew their surprise was blown. And they did something that proved their tactical sophistication. They didn't panic, didn't retreat, didn't wait for orders. They attacked immediately. The Buffalo Horns formation deployed on the run. The younger warriors of the left and right horns, the U Makijo and the U Mbonambai regiments, sprinted to the flanks. The chest, the main body of veteran warriors, advanced straight at the British camp. The loins, the reserves, sat and waited. Within minutes, 20,000 men had organized themselves for battle while running at full speed across broken terrain. No bugle calls, no written orders. Just warriors who trained together since childhood, executing a tactical plan they all understood. Back at the camp, Pulling received the warning around 11:30 a.m., large Zulu force approaching from the north. He deployed his troops in an extended firing line, 6 companies of the 24th Regiment, about 600 men, stretching over a mile in front of the camp. It was textbook colonial warfare tactics: form a line, use superior firepower to break the enemy charge, watch them retreat, pursue, and destroy. It had worked in dozens of colonial battles. It should have worked here. For over an hour, it did work. The Zulu chest hit that firing line at around noon and stopped dead. The Martini Henry rifles were devastating. Each company could fire 1,200 rounds per minute collectively. The Zulus were taking horrific casualties. Bodies piled up 30, 40, 50 yards from the British line. The warriors took cover behind anthills in dongas behind the dead. They couldn't advance. The British fire was too heavy. The officers in the firing line were confident. They'd broken the charge. Now it was just a matter of time before the Zulus retreated. But here's where the Zulu tactical genius became apparent. while the chest was pinned down, taking casualties, dying by the hundreds to keep the British focused and stationary. The horns were doing their job. The right horn, moving fast along the high ground, was sweeping around the British left flank. The left horn was sprinting around the British right, a running march that covered over a mile in less than 30 minutes. And the British, focused on the threat in front of them, didn't see the encirclement until it was too late. Around 12:30 p.m., Colonel Anthony Durnford arrived from the right flank with 500 men of the native contingent and some mounted troops. He'd been sent out earlier to scout. He'd engaged the left horn of the Zulu attack and been pushed back. His arrival should have reinforced the British position. Instead, it created confusion about command. Durnford was senior to pulling, but arrived after dispositions were made. After a brief discussion, Durnford took his men and moved to the right flank to counter the Zulu left horn that was threatening to encircle the camp. Durnford's troops held a donga, a dry watercourse, for maybe 30 minutes. They inflicted heavy casualties, but they had limited ammunition. The native contingent, African auxiliaries, were poorly armed. Only 1 in 10 had a firearm, and those were old muzzle-loading muskets. When the Zulu pressure became too intense, when ammunition started running low, Durnford's line began to collapse. And that's when the British discovered the fatal flaw in their plan, the ammunition supply system. If you made it this far, you're a true history enthusiast. Please verify your subscription now. It really helps the channel keep these forgotten stories alive. What happens next is the detail that historians still argue about, the moment when British bureaucracy met Zulu warriors and lost. The British ammunition was stored in wooden boxes, each containing 600 rounds. The boxes were secured with copper bands and screws that required a screwdriver to open. This was intentional, to prevent accidental discharge, to maintain accountability, to ensure proper distribution. In a formal engagement with time to prepare, it made sense. In a running firefight with warriors closing from 3 directions, it was a death sentence. The quartermaster system required that each company's ammunition be distributed by that company's quartermaster. Men from Company A weren't supposed to take ammunition from Company B's boxes. This wasn't just bureaucracy, it was accountability. In peacetime, losing track of ammunition could end careers, but this wasn't peacetime. And as the firing line expended rounds, as men screamed for ammunition, the system broke down. Soldiers running back to the camp found ammunition wagons, found boxes, and found they couldn't open them fast enough. Some tried to break the boxes open with rifle butts. Some found screwdrivers and opened boxes only to discover they weren't the right caliber or belonged to a different company. Quartermasters, trying to maintain order, refused to distribute ammunition to soldiers from other units. Minutes were wasted, critical minutes. Modern historians debate how much the ammunition shortage actually mattered. Some argue the battle was lost regardless, that the Zulu encirclement would have succeeded anyway. Others point to the fact that when British positions were overrun, they found bodies surrounded by empty cartridge cases, meaning those men had fired until they had nothing left and then fought with bayonets. What's undeniable is that at the critical moment, when the Zulu horns completed their encirclement and charged, many British soldiers didn't have full ammunition pouches. Durnford's line on the right collapsed first, around 1:00 p.m. His men retreated toward the camp, fighting as they went, but the withdrawal exposed the right flank of the main British firing line. The 24th Regiment companies on that flank had to refuse their line, bending back toward the camp to avoid being flanked. This created gaps. The Zulu chest, which had been pinned down for over an hour, saw the gaps and surged forward. At 2:30 p.m., a solar eclipse occurred. Not total, but enough that the sky darkened noticeably. Zulu warriors later described it. The sun turned black in the middle of the battle. We could still see it over us, or should have thought we had been fighting till evening. British survivors noted the same phenomenon. The sun was shining on the camp at the time, and then the camp looked dark, just as if a shadow was passing over it. In that darkened sky, the British line broke, not everywhere at once, in sections. The companies fell back toward the camp in fighting order initially, firing as they retreated, maintaining discipline. But the Zulu horns were closing from both flanks. The chest was advancing. And the loins, the 4,000-man reserve that had been sitting with their backs to the battle, turned around and joined the attack. The camp became chaos. Civilians, wagon drivers, camp followers started running for the road back to Rorke's Drift. Mounted troops who could have escaped easily formed defensive stands around their officers. The 24th Regiment companies tried to form squares, the classic infantry defense against cavalry and mass charges, but squares required ammunition and space and time. They had none of those. What followed was systematic butchery. The Zulus had been told to show no mercy to the Red soldiers. They didn't. The fighting became hand-to-hand. Assegai spears against bayonets, knobkerrie clubs against rifle butts. The Zulus had spent an hour absorbing British firepower, losing hundreds of warriors. Now they had the British at close quarters, where their weapons and training were superior. A Zulu warrior described what he saw. There was no stopping them. We stabbed and stabbed until our arms were tired. They were brave men, those Red soldiers. They stood and died where they were. Many of them were crying out for their mothers and their God, but they didn't run. They fought with their guns until they had no bullets, then they fought with their bayonets, then they fought with their fists and their teeth, but there were too many of us. The entire engagement, from the first contact to the final killing, lasted about 4 hours. By 3:30 p.m., organized resistance had ended. The camp was littered with bodies. Over 1,300 British, colonial, and native troops were dead. The 24th Regiment lost 750 men, including all 6 company commanders. The artillery crews died by their guns. The native contingent was slaughtered. The civilians who couldn't escape were killed. Only 55 Europeans survived. Most were mounted troops who'd been on the flanks when the line collapsed and managed to outrun the Zulu pursuit. Some escaped down a ravine now called Fugitives' Drift, riding for the Buffalo River and Natal. Lieutenants Melville and Coghill tried to save the Queen's color of the 1st Battalion, carrying the flag on horseback through the Zulu pursuit. They made it to the river, lost the color in the crossing, and were killed on the Natal bank. The Zulu casualties were estimated between 1,000 and 3,000 killed, with another 2,000 wounded. King Setchweo later said of the battle, "An assegai has been thrust into the belly of the nation. There are not enough tears to mourn for the dead. The victory cost him dearly in warriors, but it broke the British invasion." Consider hitting that like button if you've made it this far through the story of the day 2,000 British soldiers faced 20,000 Zulu warriors and learned that courage and discipline can't overcome tactical stupidity. Subscribe for more deep dives into battles where empires discovered their limitations. News of the disaster reached London on February 11th, nearly 3 weeks after the battle. Queen Victoria was reportedly shocked and furious. The British press, which had been celebrating the invasion of Zululand as another glorious colonial adventure, suddenly had to explain how the world's most powerful military had been humiliated by savages with spears. The explanations varied: ammunition problems, command failures, Zulu treachery, bad luck. Nobody wanted to admit the truth. The Zulus had simply outfought them. Lord Chelmsford, who'd been away from the camp hunting phantom Zulu armies when the battle happened, returned that evening to find his camp destroyed and his reputation ruined. He tried to blame Colonel Durnford, who was conveniently dead and couldn't defend himself. He suggested the ammunition shortage was Durnford's fault, that Durnford had disobeyed orders, that Durnford had caused the disaster. A court of inquiry later rejected most of these claims, but Chelmsford's character assassination worked well enough to save his command. The British response was massive and brutal. They sent reinforcements, 10,000 more troops, modern artillery, Gatling guns, better supplies, proper defensive protocols. The second invasion of Zululand, launched in May 1879, was nothing like the first. The British built fortified positions, moved slowly, never split their forces, and used overwhelming firepower at every encounter. At the Battle of Ulundi on July 4, 1879, British forces formed a massive hollow square, absorbed Zulu charges, and systematically destroyed the impi with rifle and artillery fire. Over 1,000 Zulus died. British casualties, 15. King Setchweo was captured, his capital burned, and the Zulu kingdom was broken up into 13 separate chiefdoms under British supervision. The victory at Isandlwana had bought the Zulus exactly 6 months of independence. In the end, rifles beat spears. But for one day, on January 22, 1879, it was the other way around. Here's where the story becomes a lesson in the psychology of empire. Isandlwana should have taught the British Empire humility. It should have forced a recognition that indigenous peoples could be militarily sophisticated, tactically brilliant, and capable of defeating European armies in fair combat. Instead, the British doubled down. They convinced themselves that Isandlwana was an aberration, a product of command failure and bad luck, not Zulu military competence. The narrative became, we lost because Chelmsford was incompetent, not because the Zulus were good. This pattern repeated itself across the empire for another 80 years. British forces would suffer surprising defeats in Afghanistan, in Sudan, in South Africa against the Boers, and each time the explanation would be everything except the actual reason, that they'd underestimated their opponents. The lesson of Isandlwana was never really learned, but the Zulus learned their lesson. After Isandlwana, they knew they could beat British tactics. They'd proven it. The problem was they couldn't beat British logistics and reinforcements. They couldn't sustain the losses. They couldn't replace casualties faster than the British could ship in more troops. The IMPI system, designed for quick campaigns and decisive battles, couldn't survive an attritional war against an industrial empire. King Sechuyo understood this. That's why he tried to negotiate after Isandlwana, offering peace terms that would have left British interests intact while preserving Zulu independence. The British weren't interested. They wanted complete submission. They got it at Ulundi. Shift your perspective for a moment and look at Isandlwana through Zulu eyes. From their viewpoint, this wasn't a glorious victory. It was a Pyrrhic disaster. Yes, they'd killed over 1,300 enemies. Yes, they'd destroyed a British column. But they'd lost at least 1,000 warriors, possibly 3,000, with another 2,000 wounded. Those were trained soldiers from age regiments that took years to rebuild. The British lost troops they could replace in weeks by shipping more from England. The math was unwinnable. The warriors who survived Isandlwana knew this. Multiple Zulu accounts describe the aftermath. Exhausted men sitting among the bodies, too tired to celebrate, too devastated by their own losses to enjoy the victory. One Induna reportedly said, "We have killed the white men, but we have broken the assegai." Meaning the Zulu military system had proven itself but destroyed itself in the process. This is the real lesson of Isandlwana. It's not about brave Zulus defeating arrogant British. It's about the fundamental mismatch between a militia-based warrior society and an industrial empire. The Zulus could win battles. They proved that what they couldn't do was win wars, because wars, especially in the 19th century, were won by logistics, not tactics, by factories producing rifles, not warriors training with spears, by railways shipping troops, not regiments marching 50 miles a day. Before we close, check out this next video on the screen about what happened at Rorke's Drift, the battle that occurred the same night as Isandlwana. While 1,300 British soldiers were dying at the camp, 4,000 Zulu warriors who'd been held in reserve at Isandlwana attacked a supply station defended by 150 British troops. What happened there rewrote the narrative and gave the British Empire the propaganda victory they desperately needed after the disaster. Picture this one last time. It's January 23, 1879 dawn. You're a Zulu warrior sitting in the ruins of the British camp at Isandlwana. You're exhausted. Your shield is shattered, your assegai is bent, your body is covered in minor wounds. Around you are bodies, red-coated British soldiers lying where they fell in clusters, your own comrades scattered among them. The ground is littered with spent cartridge cases, broken rifles, abandoned equipment. You won. Your impi destroyed the British column. You killed their soldiers, captured their weapons, burned their supplies. You proved that Zulu warriors could defeat the most advanced army in the world. And you absolutely know that it means nothing, because the British will come back with more soldiers, more guns, more of everything. And next time you won't surprise them. Next time they'll be ready. Next time you'll lose. That's what Isandlwana teaches us. Tactical brilliance can defeat technological superiority in a single battle. Perfect execution of the buffalo horns formation can encircle and destroy an enemy with better weapons. Courage and training can overcome firepower if the circumstances are right. But one battle doesn't win wars. The British Empire learned to respect Zulu military capability, but only after learning that they could destroy it anyway through sheer weight of resources. The 2,000 British soldiers who died at Isandlwana died because their commanders underestimated the enemy, split their forces, ignored defensive precautions, and assumed technological superiority guaranteed victory. The Zulus won because they'd studied British tactics, maintained operational security, executed their battle plan perfectly, and exploited every British mistake. It was a masterclass in tactical warfare, and it bought the Zulu kingdom 6 more months of existence. That's the tragedy. That's why we still study this battle 145 years later, because it proves that sometimes you can do everything right and still lose the war. The Zulus at Isandlwana were brilliant, and it didn't matter. The British Empire was too big, too rich, too mechanized to be defeated by warriors, no matter how skilled. Within a year, the Zulu kingdom was gone, divided, occupied, absorbed into the empire that it had briefly humiliated. Consider hitting that subscribe button if you've made it this far through the story of how 20,000 Zulu warriors taught the British Empire its most expensive lesson, and how that lesson was immediately forgotten in the rush to avenge the defeat. The Battle of Isandlwana is remembered in Britain as a disaster, a cautionary tale about the importance of proper command. It's remembered in Zulu history as the day they proved they could defeat the invaders, right before the invaders proved it didn't matter. The assegai had been thrust into the belly of the nation, as King Sechuyo said, but it was the Zulu nation that bled out, not the British Empire. That's the real story of Isandlwana, not courage versus cowardice, not spears versus rifles. But the tragic mathematics of empire, that you can win every battle tactically and still lose the war strategically when your enemy has infinite reinforcements and you don't. The 1,300 British dead at Isandlwana were mourned, avenged, and replaced. The 1,300 Zulu dead were irreplaceable. That's why the British Empire lasted another 70 years and the Zulu kingdom lasted another 6 months. Not because of Isandlwana, despite it.